Hello and welcome. My name is Lawrence Belfer, and I'm the founder of the 92NY Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact. I'm honored to open tonight's program, Finding Common Ground on Election Reform with Donna Brazile and Michael Steele. This is a special presentation with Common Ground Committee and the Belfer Center's Newmark Civic Life Series. Both Newmark Civic Life and Common Ground Committee are dedicated to deepening the civic bonds that unite us through engaging in civil conversations. With polarization at an all-time high, now more than ever, we need to demonstrate how we can face challenging issues together and despite political stripes. We could not think of a better opportunity than hearing from former DNC and RNC chairpersons Donna Brazile and Michael Steele on the contentious and ever-evolving issue of election reform. We at the Belfer Center are committed to combating polarization in multiple ways. Just a few weeks ago, we launched Share Our America, a one-of-a-kind domestic cultural exchange program bringing Americans of different backgrounds closer together. A group of 92NY patrons from across the country traveled to Chadron, a small agricultural community in western Nebraska, for 4 days of dialogue around faith, politics, and culture. To learn more about how you can get involved with Share Our America, please sign up at the link in the chat. Now to the program, which continues in the great spirit of bridging divides. After a short video, you'll hear from Common Ground CEO Bruce Bond, who will tell us more about the speakers and the conversation. And finally, following tonight's event, you're invited to sign up for a truly unique opportunity. The Unified Challenge is a guided online conversation where you will be matched with another American who may vote differently than you. Hosted by Unify America, a civic grassroots organization, 92NY and Common Ground Committee are proud to bring you an interactive experience to try to help close our national divide. This will take place on June 15th at 7 p.m. and we'll post a link in the chat to register. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight and enjoy the show.
Our people expect their president and the Congress to find essential agreement on issues of great moment, the wise resolution of which will better shape the future of the nation.
Never better than in those times of great challenge, when we came together not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans united in a common cause.
Because of the political divisions we see in our country today, I also think it is a counter model for how people ought to make all kinds of decisions.
We can decide to come together and make our country reflect the good inside us.
And together we shall write an American story, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us.
Thank you to Lawrence Belfer for the warm welcome, and it is such a pleasure to be co-presenting tonight's program with 92NY's Belfer Center and the Newmark Civic Life Series. And on behalf of my colleagues, the Common Ground Committee, and our media partner, the Christian Science Monitor, thank you all for attending. The video you just watched provides a window into our organization. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit group focused on bringing light, not heat, to public discourse, and healing to the challenges of incivility and polarization that threaten our country. This is the 17th public forum that we've held, and tonight's topic is finding common ground on election reform. We encourage you to tweet, and indeed we have 3 hashtags that we're using for tonight's event. They are #electionreform, #voting-rights, and #common-ground-event. Now let me introduce our incredible panel. First, I'm thrilled to welcome back our moderator, Jacqueline Adams. Jackie spent more than 2 decades as an Emmy Award-winning CBS News correspondent, with 5 of those years as a White House correspondent. Jackie is the co-author of A Blessing, Women of Color Teaming Up to Lead, Empower, and Thrive. And now let me introduce our special guests. Donna Brazile and Michael Steele are two of the best political strategists in the country, representing different sides of the political aisle. Donna is the former chair of the Democratic National Committee and of the DNC's Voting Rights Institute. In 2000, she was Vice President Al Gore's campaign manager, the first African-American woman to direct a major presidential campaign. Donna is currently an ABC News contributor. Michael is the former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland and the former chair of the Republican National Committee, and he made history both times by being the first African-American in those roles. Under his leadership, the RNC broke fundraising records and gained 63 House seats. Michael is currently a political analyst for MSNBC and host of the Michael Steele podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And with that, I hand the floor over to Jackie Adams.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for your generous introductions. It's my pleasure to be back with you and the Common Ground Committee this evening, and I'm just delighted to share our virtual stage with our esteemed panelists. Before we begin, I do want to thank our audience for submitting so many insightful questions in advance. Many of those questions will be woven into our discussion, and others will be saved for the end. Our hour together is not a lot of time, so we'll focus our discussion on trying to identify common ground solutions on three main issues: restoring faith in our elections, federal election law reform, and the third issue, whether new state election reforms are helping or hindering. So let's dive into the first subject, restoring faith in elections. When the United States was founded, only land-owning white men were allowed to vote, but Americans evolved. Voting was extended to male and female citizens of all races over the age of 18. Now, free and fair elections are supposed to be the bedrock of our democracy. All elections, national, state, and local. Here's the good news. A record number of Americans voted in the 2020 presidential election. The Pew Research Center determined that more than 6 in 10 people of voting age participated. According to multiple Trump administration election security officials, the 2020 election was the most secure in American history. And yet, the 2020 election continues to divide Americans and to undermine trust in the process itself. Let's take a look at the results of this December 2021 UMass Amherst poll. The question asked is, do you believe that Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election was legitimate or not legitimate? Here's what the poll said. 71% of Republicans said they believe President Biden is not, or probably is not, the legitimate president. And another 6% of them just weren't sure. So the question is, and this is a question that a number of our audience members asked, given this data, who's to blame for this confusion about the facts? How best can we restore faith in our elections? And even how important is it to do so? Can we begin with Donna, you first?
Well, first of all, it's a great honor to be back with you all. And thank you, Bruce, for hosting Michael and I once again. It's incumbent upon the country itself to understand that our democracy works better when everyone can participate. And democracy should not be a competitive sport between the two major political parties. Michael and I both represent parties. When I say both represent, we're no longer chair, but we represented parties that were just a small part of the fabric of our democracy. And yet, when you look at how we conduct our elections, it is almost as if it's a fight between LSU Tigers and the Roll Tide of Alabama. We're always on the field to try to beat one another. The democracy that we need today has to have several major components. One, transparency. We need to make sure that our election administrators are well trained and well versed and the law, so that no American is denied the right to vote. And lastly, I think we need to take a look at some of the modern reforms, whether it is restoring the full measure of the Voting Rights Act or looking at elements of the For the People Act that would give citizens the right to participate. Early voting is a tool, making sure that citizens are able to have a no excuse absentee ballot. I don't want to go to the polling station, so give me my ballot and let me turn it in at a drop box closest to my house. There are many ways and many steps that we can take, but one, we got to get as much of the partisanship out of it, and two, we got to focus on it in terms of democracy itself. This is a system that has been weakened and it's being drained of trust. And if we don't take prudent steps to revitalize our democracy, I think we're in trouble.
We're going to dig in a little bit more deeply later in the hour in some of those election reforms that you mentioned, Donna. But Michael, do you have any common ground with what Donna just said?
I do. And again, I want to thank Bruce for the opportunity to re-engage with my dear friend Donna Brazile. We love to tear up the turf a little bit, and this is another opportunity where we get to do that, which is always fun. Jackie, it's so good to see you and to be with you. And to all of you who are part of this evening, thank you so much for taking time. It expresses to me a genuine interest in the things that matter right now in our economy, in our culture, and in our country. It is about our democracy, and the central element of that are three words and a fundamental principle. The three words are "we the people," and the fundamental principle is that all of us get to play. All of us get to play. It may not have started out that way, but that's how it is right now. And the fact of the matter is, if we don't embrace that from the beginning, all the discussions about reform, all the discussions about the change that is sorely needed, and even discussions about improving upon the good work that has already been done in some areas, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't fundamentally believe that the faces that are on the screen now, those in this audience now, and those who don't look like you, live where you are, who do not come from your background, have any role to participate in this wonderful, wacky experiment we call America, then this doesn't work. It doesn't matter what the reforms are. It doesn't matter fundamentally what we try to achieve. And that, unfortunately, is where we find ourselves today, where one party, my party, believes that you don't get to play on your terms. You only play on their terms. And then you have a lot of voters, as I begin to look going into this November, who are sit back going, oh, well, inflation's high, and oh my God, the price of gas is so-and-so. I'm just going to vote Republicans back into power. I'm going to, Joe Biden is not. Dude, look, the reality of it is those things don't matter if you can't vote. So I think the fundamental aspect for me is, how do we re-engage each other to be stewards of our civic responsibility, one to the other, to make certain that everyone have free and unfettered access to a ballot box, that our government doesn't get in the way of that, right? And that people who genuinely want to see good things come from this are the men and women we should ask to lead in this space. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. Donna and I have been teaming up from time to time around the country over the past few years to stress these points. So this conversation right now gives us a further opportunity to make sure that we're all ignited the same way towards the country and its fledgling democracy. We're only 245 years old, folks. It's not like we've been around a hell of a long time. All right, Great Britain 1,000 years, Paris 900. But we're big. We play hard. But right now, I think some of us are playing with a little bit of stupidity and lights out when it comes to how important our democracy is relative to other things.
You're not mincing words, Michael.
No.
Let's turn to our second topic, federal election laws, and whether, in fact, reforms are needed. One of the most significant statutory changes in the relationship between federal and state government in the area of voting was the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. The Voting Rights Act had an immediate and dramatic impact on increasing the number of African American voters who had been denied their rights. Let's listen to now Senate Minority Leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, on the Senate floor back in 2006, just before the Senate reauthorized the Voting Rights Act by an astounding vote of 98-0.
And one of my favorite sayings that many of us use from time to time is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is a good piece of legislation that has served an important purpose over many, many years. I had an opportunity, as many of us did yesterday, to meet with members of the NAACP, which happens to be meeting here in Washington as we speak, from my state, in my office. They were excited to be here. There were older people, middle-aged people, and younger people in this group. All of them thrilled to be in Washington, and to be in Washington potentially at the same time this very, very important legislation was going to be reauthorized. And we know the President will be speaking to the NAACP and will be signing the bill. We'll be able to pass it here in the Senate in a few hours. And this landmark piece of legislation will continue to make a difference, not only in the South, but for all of America and for all of us, whether we're African Americans or not. Mr. President, what I would like to do is insert my prepared remarks in the record at this point as if made. And I believe I'm safe in predicting that this legislation will be approved overwhelmingly this afternoon, and is something all members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle can feel deeply proud of having accomplished.
So that was then. This past August, the House passed H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which aims to restore enforcement provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that were struck down in 2013 by the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell does not support this bill. He says that it's already against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race, so the bill is unnecessary. Michael, is Senator McConnell right? Why do you think he's changed his opinion between 2006 and now? And does, in fact, the John Lewis Act reach beyond restoring the enforcement provisions to the original Voting Rights Act?
The reality of it is he was right in 2006. He's dead wrong now. He knows it. Everyone knows it. The only thing that's changed is the position of a party that for generations now had been supportive of advancing voting rights going back to the 1960s. Certainly, President George Bush, Daddy Bush 41, also very strong advocates of the Voting Rights Act and the imperative that it represented to make sure that we had that unfettered access to the ballot box for African Americans that I mentioned before. This new iteration of view on the Voting Rights Act is nothing more than pure politics. It is nothing more than a sham response, tepid fear of Trumpism being called out by Trump allies. That's now been encrusted into the Supreme Court decision that not only watered down, but virtually made inoperable the Voting Rights Act. There is no spirit inside the party to re-emerge in that space in a vigorous way. In other words, to fight for that, to support the John Lewis Act. So it is incumbent now on others to do that. And that falls back on we the people. If this is something of value to us, then we need to elect men and women who support that value, that are themselves arbiters and advocates for all of us having access to the ballot box. There is a reason why the Republican National Committee was under a court-ordered edict from 1986 that curtailed our engagement to defraud voters and to suppress their vote. That having been lifted after shortly before the 2020 election in 2018, we've now seen what the party will do in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, and elsewhere, absent the Voting Rights Act, absent the federal regulations that curtails the behavior of states to infringe upon those rights. So I know Mitch knows he knows better, but the politics of the day ordered his steps. And I think the voters now need to reorder that majority, that impending majority going into November and into 2024. If you want anything close to voting rights, that's the only way it's going to get done, because when the power is returned to those who fomented insurrection, baby, watch out. Voting rights
Donna,
will be
any common ground there?
Voting rights will be the least of your problems.
No. Donna?
Well, as I stated earlier, we're a stronger nation when everyone can participate in the electoral process. As Michael was talking about Senator McConnell and his lack of action on restoring the Voting Rights Act, I just kept bringing back to my memory that moment in my family's history when we learned that we could register to vote. My parents learned, I was a kid. And there was excitement, there was joy, and there was also a lot of crime. Because I believe to grow up in the segregated South, as I did in Louisiana back in 1965, that moment could not have happened any sooner. I mean, my dad had come home from Korea and had to go back to sitting in the back of the bus. I can remember my mom and my grandmother worried about my dad coming home at night. I can remember what they thought every election day when they were afraid to go and register. And I can also recall what it was like. So it was joyful. They could pick their own representatives. In fact, just recently, we lost Shirley Burton, one of the first Black officials outside of New Orleans and Kenner, where I grew up. She died at 94. And I thought about that first election. And Michael, you know, I was a young kid. I loved to go out and knock on doors even before I was 18. First of all, I wanted to know what people were cooking. And secondly, it was an opportunity to connect with my friends. And when Mrs. Burton decided to run, she said, I need you to go to Pam's house. I need you to go to Baby Jack's house. She knew what I was doing. I was basically saying, are you registered to vote? That moment had arrived finally in Kenner, Louisiana in 1969. It took that long, even after the passage, for people to feel that they could go and register without being harmed. So this is important that we restore these anti-discrimination features. And I want to say something. I mean, there's another elephant in the room, and Michael, sorry, it's an elephant, but, and that's John Roberts, who said the Voting Rights Act was outdated in Shelby v. Holder. And if you look at the data from 1998 until 2013, when they basically, you know, diluted the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court of the United States, there were over 87 cases where the Justice Department denied the localities' jurisdictions, denied them the right to hold elections until they cleared up the errors. And here we are in the 21st century, and we're still moving polling places from where Black people, yes, and poor people, because it's not just Black, it's brown, it's poor. They are moving locations, precincts, without telling you. But if you cast your ballot in a different precinct and you're not able to cure it, your ballot will be tossed out. So from Fannie Lou Hamer, the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party has not always been perfect. And I'm still on the Rules Committee, and I can guarantee you we're still not perfect. But from 1964 until now, the Democratic Party has tried to become more progressive as it relates to voting rights, as access to the ballot, making sure that people with prior convictions can have their voting rights restored. What I'm seeing in the Republican Party that provided the votes in 1965, 64, and 65, Civil Rights Act, as well as the Voting Rights Act, there's been a total reversal. They're AWOL, they're not helping, they're restricting. All you have to do is look at the top 50 states for voting in this country. And I can tell you where they are. Let's start out Western California. But I can also tell you where the bottom 50 states are. They're located in the South. Texas being a leader, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, of course, Mississippi and Alabama. Louisiana is number 27. I don't know if I should be happy with that, but at least we're not Texas at 50. We have work to do. And the first thing we should do is restore the Voting Rights Act. It's an anti-discrimination act. So if you're a Native American and you live in a community, you can get it in your language. If you're Hispanic, if you're Asian American, Cantonese, Mandarin, you can get it in your language. That's the Voting Rights Act. That should not be diluted. That should never be destroyed.
What I hear you saying, Donna, is that voting rights is deeply personal. But I want to turn our attention now to some recordings that Politico just published. And the recordings were of Republican National Committee officials strategizing about how to install party-trained volunteers as poll workers. The discussion on the tapes is about training a network of poll workers to challenge results in Democratic majority districts and to build a hotline to friendly attorneys along with a network of judges and police. So Michael, is this just standard election politics or is this something new? And is the idea to use poll watchers as poll workers? And if you can, in your answer, explain the difference, that would be helpful.
So let's start with the difference. A poll worker is someone that the party has no control over. In other words, a poll worker as a party chairman, which I was a county chairman, as well as a state chairman and national chairman. So what we would do, what we are allowed to do is, I could call a meeting or I could try to send out a message saying, hey, we're looking for poll workers to go be election officials, to be election judges, to be people who do intake of the voters when they come in, who man the polls inside the precinct, showing you where to go, handle your ballot, take your ballot, process your ballot, meaning they take it and put it where it needs to go. Those folks work for the county election board or the state election board, depending on how it's set up in your state. But they're not party people, all right? They may come from the party. They may be someone who the party reached out to and say, hey, we're looking for folks. Could you go volunteer? But they're paid. They're paid employees of the Board of Elections. A poll watcher is what Donna and I would, those are our bread and butter. Those are the men and women, the boys and girls who are going to be there to volunteer to make sure that there's no funny business. They oversee what happens in the polling place. They're allowed inside the room. And if there's something that's out of sorts, they then go to a poll worker or an election judge and say, hey, we have a problem with this process, or something about this person's ballot is not right or whatever. What the Republican Party is doing is they're now saying, okay, since we can't have poll watchers handle ballots and be inside the room in an official way, what we want to do is train them to be poll workers. So basically, we want to put the wolf in the sheep's clothing inside the room to do the work that they otherwise would not be able to do, which is why when you listen to the tape, they start talking about how they, you got to be careful about, being overzealous in calling out fraud or trying to stop people from doing the ballot, because they know these people are going to go buck wild inside the room because they're already amped up to believe that the process is rigged and that there's cheating going on, when everything, as we opened up this conversation, has shown that there is no cheating. So this is something new.
Donna, have Democrats used these tactics in the past, and are the Democrats countering?
I cannot speak to the efforts of Democratic voters or leaders prior to 1982, but I can tell you from 82 on, because I've been an active member of the Democratic Party, we don't tolerate this. We're more old school, as Michael would say. I mean, that's our bread and butter. I started off as a precinct captain. And you had to know the election supervisors, the League of Women Voter type citizens, male and females, that would staff the polling site. But you were the partisans. You had the literature, you had the gear, you also had food, water, which in some cases now is perhaps outlawed. But your job was to make sure things run smoothly. And also because you were the precinct captains, you knew all of the people on that list who had said they were going to vote. And your job was to make sure they turn out. I mean, there was a rhythm. This is a cynical, nefarious scheme that is targeted toward minority communities, and say a Detroit or Philadelphia, that would try to have these so-called poll monitors or whatever workers identify fraud, not to run and say to the supervisor, hey, I think Michael is here to vote for the third time. Seriously, but that's election fraud. Michael is coming back to vote again. You tell that to the supervisor. Instead, there's going to be a special app. These folks are being trained by, and it's supported by the Republican National Committee. Is there a
reform that could eliminate? Is there a reform that could eliminate these new efforts? Is there a way to prevent this from being very confusing at a minimum in the fall?
Arguably no, because if I am trained as a poll worker, I'm going to follow the process as clearly as clearly delineated as it may be. Right. The problem is understand exactly what the motive is here, what the sought after outcome is. It is to create chaos in that precinct. It is to create confusion in that precinct. It is to gum up the works as much as possible. Remember the rest of the tape, they talk about, okay, we want to get police up to speed on what we're doing. So guess what? When they show up and our poll workers are screaming about the fraud, they know what they need to do. We need to get the lawyers, right, to understand what we're doing in this app. So when it becomes a legal challenge, they know what they need to do. We need to get the judges to know what's going on. So when it appears before the judges, unlike what we saw in 2020, where 63 out of 63 judges, many of whom were Trump-appointed judges, said, get the hell out of here with this. There's no fraud. These judges will know what they need to do. So they're gaming the system on the front end. They're grooming the lawyers. They're grooming the police. They're trying to groom the judges. So when all that confusion that's created in that precinct gets processed through, those ballots are not going to get counted. To Donna's first point, and this is important, folks, you'll need to know where they're doing this. They're not doing this in the whitest parts of Michigan or the whitest parts of Pennsylvania or even the state as a whole. They're doing it in Detroit. They're doing it in Philadelphia. They want to do it in Atlanta. They want to do it where Black and brown voters are because they can't get those votes. They want to discount those votes. They want to eliminate.
This brings us to a question that John, one of our audience members, has asked, and it sort of gets to the heart of what you're saying, Michael. Isn't the GOP opposition to voting rights the results of their fears of demographic changes in America? By 2043, if not sooner, this will be a majority-minority country. And our viewer, John, continues, are McConnell and the Republicans guilty of systemic racism? Are they trying to prevent the loss of power by the traditional white ruling class?
That is ultimately it. The party absolutely since I was chairman, because one of the things I did as national chairman was gave a speech at the National Press Club in which I formally announced the Southern strategy was over. We weren't kowtowing to white Southern men to win elections. That strategy had been in place since 1968. And that's largely because that's where the votes were. To win the White House, you had to go through the South, right? The Democrats controlled the South. Johnson decided, I'm going to buy into the Kennedy vision on civil rights, capitulated. Now, Johnson was a segregationist. He wasn't a fan of black folks, but he got it. He understood it, right? And so worked with Republicans to get both the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act passed. Nixon, looking at his chances of winning, decided this strategy, the Southern strategy, was the best way to do it. The party has been playing that strategy ever since. To your point, Jackie, the demographics of the country are changing. Donna knows this very well. She was chairman of the party. She knows where the numbers are going. The Democrats are concerned about that too, because that doesn't mean that all those votes are going to be their votes. So both parties have to continue to up their game in order to capture and keep those voters. Republicans have decided that's okay. White Southern male votes and white suburban women, we scare them enough. We get white men angry enough. That's how we're going to win elections. So that question touches on the heart of what we see happening here around trying to change the rules of the game, starting with the elimination of the validity of the Voting Rights Act, to now what we're seeing is outright suppression by moving precincts, shutting them down, cutting the time allowed to vote, and saying you can't bring water to people standing in line for 8 hours in the damn heat, right? This is the problem that the party doesn't want to confront, that we have nothing to say to American voters anymore. So,
Donna, any common ground here?
Well, first of all, we have to work with as many Americans as possible to try to ensure that we hold on to these cherished American values of access and fairness. I mean, we shouldn't have 50 different types of voting systems in this country. Unfortunately, our elections are decentralized. And because of that, the power rests with the states and the governor and the lawmakers, and of course, the municipalities who actually conduct these elections. But what's happening now, and the acceleration of what I call the big lie. I've never seen anything like this in my life. So I'm gonna try to say this in less than 2 minutes, and Michael, break me up. When I was Al Gore's campaign manager, remember, we came within 537 votes of winning the state of Florida. And because we sought to litigate it, to have certain counties recounted or the process continued, ultimately, the Florida Supreme Court got involved. The federal circuit courts got involved, and it went to the Supreme Court. That evening, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Al Gore told me to shut it down. And I'm like, being an organizer, I'm like, well, I can keep this going. I can go right now and get a army of folks in front of the Supreme Court. And he said, no, they've spoken, shut it down. What's happening right now, in my humble opinion, is that we are breaking down our election system, where only a few people will be able to participate. And the rest of us, well, go figure. Election law, this notion of fraud is a big lie. There was no fraud. In fact, it's rare in American politics. Nobody impersonated anybody to vote. And by the way, Congress is as popular as a root canal, so nobody's want to go to jail for voting twice for those folks.
So how do we fix all of this? Is it HR 1, the For the People Act, that is a whole grab bag of voting rights, election ethics, and campaign finance reform efforts that's backed by the White House? Is that the answer?
Not as long as you need 60 votes, you won't be able to fix anything. You can even fix a bad tire on the highway. They wouldn't let you because you need 60 votes to stop traffic. No, it's not going to come simply because our lawmakers are trying to make it happen. We know the John Lewis Act would be effective in restoring the Voting Rights Act, both Section 2, which is an anti-discriminatory provision that says if you endure discrimination, you have the right to sue, and then Section 5, which pre-clearance, which was a very important tool, and making sure that every state under the jurisdiction of the Voting Rights Act complied with the letter of the law. But where we are today, whether it's HR 1 was like going into a restaurant and having a buffet. I mean, it was everything. Michael, they had everything on that bill.
Yeah, don't even get me started on that one.
Well, it was
but Michael, are there any parts of the bill that the Republicans could agree with? Are there any parts of the bill that could get?
Sure, if you got those Republicans that stand with me back in the room, the ones that are there now. Look, it's just so our audience understands where I come from on this, because I know some people probably scratching their head going, my God, he sounds more like a Democrat on this than Donna. No. What I sound like is someone who believes in our democracy. And the fact that we need to stop putting labels around voting, right? We need to stop putting the R and the D, the C and the P, the conservative and the progressive around voting, because citizens don't really view that process that way, number one. Number two, as someone who's always been a champion coming out of a very difficult political environment, growing up in Washington, D.C., getting involved in politics in D.C. as a Black Roman Catholic conservative Republican, there are about three of us, bro. That's it. And so it wasn't a whole lot of us in that room. And then moving to a state that's outnumbered 2-1, being in a county of 58,000 Republicans out of 800,000 people. So I understand the value of the vote and why it's so damned important, which is why I press so hard. So to the broader question of what Donna's talking about, everyone should have access to that ballot box. And the parties have to make their relative cases to those voters. Make your case. I've always said, as a county chairman all the way up the line, I'm not afraid to go and make my case to those voters. I'll stand on any platform in this country with Donna Brazile and debate any issue you want to debate, because I'm ready to make my case. I don't need to go change the way those people hearing that case access the ballot box. Because if I make the case the right way, if I have the best message and the best operation and the best, messengers out there, I've got a 50-50 chance, right? That's what the country promised you, a 50-50 chance, and the voters are going to decide. But that's not where we are now. And so where I would disagree with Donna a little bit, I'm not about the feds coming in and setting up a national voting standard. I am about the Voting Rights Act. I am about the feds making sure that the playing field is level and fair. And when you act up state X, here's the hammer. That's what happened in New Jersey when Republicans tried to change the game. They got caught, and for 30 years they were told, guess what? We're going to watch you in the state of New Jersey. So that's okay. This idea that, and this goes back to HR1, to have this, Christmas tree of legislation that does more than by and large, we don't need to have done. I don't need the feds getting in all up in that space. I trust the states. And where states don't behave and don't act, that's where that federal hammer needs to come in, which is what made the Voting Rights Act, at least for me, much more important than even the Supreme Court saw it to be.
I want to move us, Donna, I'll come back, but I want to move us along because we're running out of time to our third topic, state election reforms. And one of our audience members, Roy, asks about gerrymandering, which is a complicated partisan issue. But Roy in our audience says about redistricting, quote, gerrymandering has been used and abused by both political parties for centuries to gain and retain power. What are your recommendations for improving or scrapping a system that's so politicized? Donna, do you want to take that one?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying HR1, which I call like a buffet. Maybe I should call it a poo-poo platter, because there was a lot of good stuff. And I think one of the good areas in the 10 titles was ending this type of partisan gerrymandering. Back in the 1980s, when I became a congressional staff and prior to being an intern, there were about 174 competitive races, congressional races. Today is less than 40 because these seats are not designed with the voters in mind. They're designed with the politician, a D and a R. So yes, HR1 would have also been a quote unquote federal fix for that. But as Michael said, it did not have the support, and I don't see it as having the kind of broad support. Gerrymandering has rendered us to essentially two major minority parties, if that makes sense, as representing the country, when indeed non aligned voters, independent voters, or whatever there may be, they outnumber both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And often they don't have a say in the primary process. They're on the sidelines waiting for us to pick out our players, and they're often the extreme, or more today, more the extreme of both major political parties versus the mainstream.
That's where I sit personally, frankly. I'm an independent and I don't get to vote in New York State primaries. Michael, any common ground here on this gerrymandering issue?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot more common ground here than I think folks may realize. And there are a number of democracy-oriented groups out there that are pressing and pushing inward on this issue, creating that third lane, as a lot of us like to refer to it, for citizens to get on, to get off the off-ramp for Democrats and Republicans and onto something else, to create competition in the system, and to create a greater voice, a leveler, if you will, for a lot of Americans. I've always, again, come down, look, Donna told the story of her family, and it resonates so dear with me because it's very much how I experienced access to the ballot box growing up in Washington, when still, Southern City, people forget that, still segregated in the 1960s, where my mom couldn't do certain things for me and with me that I could today with my kids. So I have a very strong appreciation of that value of my family having access to that ballot box. So for me, the more control citizens have over that process, the better it is for all of us. The more access we have into developing the outcome, the better it is. So commissions, independent commissions that are formed, that are made up by former judges, former political types, maybe former electeds, all the better, but primarily of citizens. There are a lot of smart people in this redistricting space that can be a part of that conversation to help educate and inform those commissions in a way and at a time that, and I see my friend agrees with me, that will allow for citizens to have a better play and a better say in this. The fact of the matter is, we let elected officials decide where their districts are. They control how the power is distributed. And they're not going to distribute it away from themselves. They're going to distribute it into themselves. And so in a county like where I live in Prince George's, when I sued the governor in 2001 for the redistricting map that they drew in 2000, it was because in a county of 800,000 Black folks, majority Black folks, how did we wind up with 5 out of 8 white state senators? How does that happen, right? It's because the way the lines are drawn and the way they set the system up so that the primary is white enough to keep that power, and the general election is Black enough to make sure it's sealed in. So the reality of it is, we want to change this across the board, and the more citizens have a say and control in it, the better it is for the country.
Well, that leads me to the final question that we had for this state election reform section of the discussion. Let's look at Georgia. There was unprecedented turnout in their recent primary elections. So with all of the challenges, with all of the contentious debates that there have been in Georgia, what does it tell you about the criticisms when there was nonetheless this unprecedented turnout?
Stacey Abrams said to me, she said, just because people can swim doesn't neglect the fact that there's still sharks in the water. Yeah, they took away the drop boxes. They took away the ability to do all sorts of the polls on Sunday. They curtailed early voting. They shortened the early voting period and shortened the amount of hours. And still people felt motivated to vote, because in Georgia, and I credit again Stacey Abrams for putting together a playbook in 2018 that allowed the Democrats to gain 2 Senate seats. Her playbook is very simple. When the rules are changed, you go out and you educate people, you provide them with information. So I just want to say, I live in DC and Michael was born in DC, but I'm proud of DC. DC, first of all, they alerted me a month ago that I was going to receive my ballot in the mail. So if I didn't receive it, I could call and let them know. Then they sent me my ballot, and of course it's here. And they also just informed me that I have 9 days of early voting before I either submit this through a ballot box or I can still bring it in person. This is the best thing that I love about being a district resident, a voter guide. It is very thick. I get the names of all of the candidates. Of course, they're ruining my mailbox, which is why Zora, she wasn't really rooting for you, Michael. That time, that was a mailman.
That was a mailman.
Dewey.com was coming early, but we get a voter guide. So we need to educate. We need to put Civics 101 back into our conversation, not just in the classrooms, but also in our community. We need to have opportunities to talk. In DC, for example, I cannot vote for all Democrats for the at-large seats. I have to vote for a non-Democrat. And back in the day, Carol Schwartz was our go-to Republican. Michael knows who she is. And nowadays, I have to read up on all of these non-Democrats because I'm like, who are these people? So education, providing people with the tools they need, give them the opportunity to cast their ballots when they have the time to cast their ballots, or make it an election day a holiday, as 6 states have done. There are ways in which we can increase access, make it fair and transparent enough so that we increase voters' trust in our system.
Let's do a quick lightning round about some of the election reforms that are under discussion. And of course, the goal is how do we get more eligible Americans to register and to vote? Which of these reforms would help? Voting by mail. It's been used successfully for years by Oregon, Colorado, and Washington State, and more recently in California, Hawaii, Nevada, Utah, and Vermont. Should there be increases in voting by mail?
Yes.
Mike? Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Donna?
Vote by mail.
Early voting?
I haven't voted yet, but I have 10 days. I have to choose which of the Republican or the Independent I'm going to vote for. That takes time for me.
Early voting, yes. Early voting,
Early voting is great.
It should be allowed, and it should be such that it gives voters a legitimate amount of time to actually participate.
That's right.
Don't give me this 5 days of early voting.
What about voting ID requirements? Why do they hinder voting, or do they? Voter ID requirements.
So I'll jump on this one. This is where Donna and I may disagree. I have no problem with voter IDs. I think voter ID should be an integral part of this. And the way you get at it is have the state governments, sanction what those IDs may look like. If it's not your legitimate driver's license or your school ID from the university you may be attending or something, then issue explicitly a voter ID. Look, I don't mind going to a location, having another photo taken and having that be my new voter ID. When I go to re-register, which you have to do from time to time to re-register your vote so the system is updated. I don't know what the hell everybody's so afraid of. You need an ID to transact a bank business. Go to your own bank where you've been for 40 years and try to take money out without an ID, without a driver's license or some government issued ID. I find getting cash in my hand to be less important than my ability to access the ballot box, to be honest with you, because I can always get cash. I may not be able to get the vote.
Well, I am a strong proponent of making sure that if you require a certain form of identification, you should also supply that form of identification. Yep. Don't give me a rule that says that in Texas, my state issued student ID, because I go to University of Texas, is not sufficient, but my hunting license. Or in the case of my sister who lived in Orange County at the time, and she said, how many forms of ID do I need? I said, one, your driver's license. And she had to bring multiple forms of ID, which included, of course, utility bills. So I am for that. And just remember, 40% of Black people are unbanked. Unbanked, meaning they basically do their financial transactions that require fees, money orders, et cetera, wiring money. So we have to be very clear about what form of ID so that we have some universal standard that we can all agree upon.
Last reform that I'm going to talk about, souls to the polls, Sunday voting. I think, Donna, you mentioned that in an earlier answer. Should we expand souls to the polls or not?
You know, if the Spirit moves you and after you complete your service, you want to continue your service at another location, then I don't have a problem with it. You know what I used to love about Souls to the Polls is that you knew that you could get people prepared after church to take a bus and go and vote and get it all over with, and then go home and resume watching football or doing whatever. It was efficient. It was effective. It was one more tool that we used to try to encourage more people to participate in the electoral process. I hope it returns.
If all the other processes are in place, valid ID, checking voter identification or confirming voter participation when you sign up, when you go into the precinct, if all those pieces, all those other pieces are there, paper ballot, you know, when you get technology is great, but baby, you need paper ballots. You need paper ballot to back all this up, right?
I agree.
Why are we so upset that people want to go vote on a Sunday? I mean, look, a lot of my evangelical friends, y'all just need to organize yourselves. All you white evangelicals are so concerned about Black people voting on Sunday. Just organize, do a fish fry after service and get people in the you know, do a conga line if you need to down to the local precinct. In other words, communities will find a way to engage their voters and to get them to participate. The difference between 2018 and 2020 in Georgia was how Stacey Abrams, instead of turning inward and sulking about what happened in the 2018 election, she turned outward. She went to the community and said, we're just going to overwhelm the system. Y'all just going to show up and you're going to vote. So what is so wrong with that? What is so wrong with having people who actually want to participate? Here's the dirty truth, Jackie, and both Donna and I know this. When I ask people the question, do the Democratic Party and the Republican Party want everybody to vote? What's the answer? No, they don't. They only want their voters to vote. And among their voters, only the ones that they've identified they want to vote. So this idea, which is why the founders were so concerned about political parties, factions as they called them at the time, taking control of this electoral process, taking control of the politics of the country, was they would be picking winners and losers. And we see that play out in our voting system every year.
Let's go to the final component of our program tonight. Let's go to questions from our audience. They have other ideas about potential reforms, and let's attack this in a lightning round as well. Another Donna asks, how can we pass state or federal laws that ensure that election administration officials are nonpartisan? And do you think there's bipartisan support for nonpartisan election officials? And how would they be selected?
Well, I can't do that in a lightning round because so much is happening today with election deniers winning local races, with state Supreme Court judges on the ballot in multiple states this year. Our process is just drowning with partisans right now. But I still, as Michael said earlier, I still have faith that at the end of the day, the American people and the people that we elect will do the right thing and count all of the votes and make sure that nobody is denied the right to vote. But as we speak, we're talking about a massive run on election officials in this country, including threatening election officials who some people believe did not do the right thing by proposing alternate electors. So it's a complicated conversation, and we would need another hour to discuss it.
So I've got a real quick fix here.
Okay.
I don't offer a lot of them, but here's one. Unelect the bastards. You know who's standing in the way. Folks, this is not complicated. We started this conversation with 3 words, we the people. Where do you not see yourself in that? You control who has access to the decisions that impact how you vote. The same decisions that impact where you live, where you bank, where you go to school. You know who those people are. And if they're standing in the way of your ballot, get them out of the way and vote them out. I don't understand why this. Look, y'all, everybody's like, oh, my congressman is great. No, he ain't. He's part or she's part of the problem. Vote him out. Start fresh. You know what you want. Why don't you just demand it? And when they can't live up to that, when they can't produce that, why are you continuing to give them the power over you? The reason they moved 7 precincts out of your district that you now have to catch a bus to go into another district to vote is because you elected the numbnut who did that. You don't want them there? Take them out, because they're taking you out systematically, precinct by precinct, election by election. And you want it to stop, you stop it, because we are where we are because you keep electing people who are doing what they're doing.
Our viewer Susan says, should we have more than a 2-party system, since this seems to polarize one side or the other? Susan wants to see a centrist party. Yes? No?
Hey,
Yes.
you have the right to go out and organize anything
Yes.
you want. The Constitution and this country gives you that opportunity. Look, we have 2 major parties, but we have essentially 4 or 5 parties that are now constraining and also demanding things of our 2 major political parties. I can tell you, as probably more of a mainstream progressive Democrat, that we have people who believe inside my party that I am part of the establishment, a corporate Democrat. So there are all types of Democrats within the Democratic Party. It's a multiracial party, and there's a lot of people who want the Democratic Party to do more, deliver more, and represent more. So we have these fights, and I think Michael would say the same thing about the Republican Party and the tension going on there between the MAGA line and others.
Yeah. Create another lane.
Dylan, another viewer asks, would Americans feel more confident about elections if we had ranked choice voting systems nationwide? And how would we transition to such a system?
Well, we're already. I'm intimately involved in this space on a number of levels. One, I'm part of a national team that is working on national popular vote, so that we are trying to create a compact among the states to agree that the winner of the national popular vote in a presidential cycle will get to the 270 electoral votes to make that individual president. So it's a way, without having to go through constitutional conventions and amending the Constitution. The Constitution already allows for this. I'll give you a good example: lotteries. States compact to agree to do the lottery, and that the winner, from the District of Columbia, will get money from Maryland, and the winner in Maryland will get money from Louisiana. So we can make those agreements and those arrangements. Ranked choice voting, Final Five voting, which is a great effort that's underway right now in states like Alaska, where everybody gets in the pool. Everybody gets in the pool. You want to run for that office? Everybody gets in it. That's your primary. Doesn't matter. Party label doesn't matter. The top 5 go to a general election in November. All right. And so you have a lot of states beginning to look at these narratives, look at these examples of how to reform the state system, the electoral system in their states. And it's not just on the West. It's in the South, it's in the Northeast. There are a number of states that are looking more creatively because of what Donna referred to before, is this kind of logjam that's preventing people getting access to the ballot box. They're finding ways to give them that power to exercise their right to vote.
You can look at both New York and, of course, San Francisco, 13 cities, Cambridge, Massachusetts. You can also look at the state of Maine.
Maine, yep.
Right. Well, you anticipated Brenda's question, our audience member, Brenda, and I think it's going to be the final one. What are the pros and cons of the Electoral College? And in fact, is there a third option?
Michael just outlined that third option, direct popular vote. You know, we Democrats do a great job of getting out the vote. I used to say we didn't do a good job of counting the votes, but we have the majority of voters. We had the majority of voters in the last 4 out of 5 presidential elections. And yet, take a look at the country. We now have a country where the senatorial makeup of your state is similar to your presidential vote. So there are some real common sense, I think, reforms that we need to look at so that more citizens, not less citizens, can feel that their voices are being represented in not just the halls of Congress, but state houses. I didn't mention this, the trifecta, 37 states, 75% of the country, you're represented by one party or the other. 24 states are represented just by Republicans, that's in the state legislature, and as well as the governor's seat. And Democrats have 24 Republicans and 13 for Democrats. Got a lot of work to do, folks.
You do. And just real quick on that, I'll go back and reiterate the national popular vote is one way to deal with that. Look, you open up the Pandora's box of having a constitutional convention to address the Electoral College. It's crazy. You've got efforts underway and discussions around the electoral vote count, and that's something that the federal side of it can do. The Congress can do something to deal with the Electoral Count Act, et cetera. But citizens right now are trying to find another way, and as we speak. In this compact and the National Popular Vote Compact, we are 76 electoral votes away from the 270 that we need to affect the presidential election. My hope was that it'd be 2024, may not be 2024, but by 2028, we will have the 270 electoral votes in the compact that will then allow for the citizens to elect the president of the United States for the first time in its history, noting that it is the only office of all 500,000 elected offices in this country. It is the only one without direct election by the American people, and that needs to change.
We're just about at the end of our program. This has been a fascinating, spirited, personalized discussion. But I want to give both of you a couple minutes, 2 minutes to sum things up. Can you leave us with any words of hope or inspiration? Michael, you hinted at this. Are you optimistic about future elections? And what can each of us do to help heal the incivility and polarization that the nation is facing? Donna, do you want to begin?
I was going to let Michael, Michael was preaching just a moment ago, and he got me so motivated, I almost opened up my ballot. I was just a few weeks ago, I was at Mount Union College in Alliance, Ohio, and I didn't know exactly where I was. So I got out a map and I said, finally, I'm between the Cleveland airport and the Pittsburgh airport. But during that evening of speaking with the students, one student walked up before the end of the program and she said, "What gives you hope?" And for a while, I didn't know what to say. And then I finally said, "John Lewis still gives me hope." I said, because he understood what would happen if he tried to cross that bridge. And yet John Lewis and his generation, they crossed that bridge. And that is the bridge that we must continue to build, the bridge to the future. That gives me hope. Despite all of the troubles, the problems, and all of the pain that we might be experiencing right now, what gives me hope is that there's still men and women like John Lewis who are willing to cross that bridge.
Good trouble. There's a lot of good trouble to be made. This is. I'll be honest with everybody. This is a tough one for me. I'm generally a glass half full kind of guy, but I'm worried. I'm concerned I do fear, genuinely fear, that more and more Americans are giving up on this experiment than leaning into it. That more and more Americans are willing to look past fomented insurrection and see it as legitimate political discourse instead of for what it really was and what it really is and what it portends, not just in this upcoming election cycle in November, but in the one in 2024. So I'm waiting for the American people to show me that they still believe in this thing called America. And I ask you, do you? Because how you answer that question tells me whether or not we should be hopeful, or whether or not we should really be concerned about what comes next. So the jury's out for me. I'm just being very honest about it. I try not to be pessimistic and a Debbie Downer. Like I said, I generally look and see, man, turn the corner, there's going to be good things. Yeah, Buffalo and Uvalde. Yeah, I don't know. Tulsa. I don't know, folks. You tell us, because Donna and I can be hopeful and inspirational, but if 6 out of 10 of you, 8 out of 10 of you aren't, what do we do? So I'm really putting this on us. We are where we are because this is where we want to be. And if we don't want to be here any longer, if we realize this is not the journey that our forebears set out for us, despite how difficult and rocky it was from the very beginning, despite the fact that the three of us weren't included in that journey from the very beginning, but now we are a part of that journey. But there's a generation that looks at us and say, we don't want you to be a part of the journey going forward. How do you respond to that?
Donna Brazile, Michael Steele, thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your experience. And thank you to everyone for watching, but don't go away. We're going to turn the proceedings over to the CEO of Common Ground Committee, Bruce Bond, for some final thoughts. Bruce?
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's been a very enlightening and exciting evening. I hope the conversation between these outstanding guests has demonstrated to you, our listeners, that people in different parties can agree on important issues and has built a better understanding of our election system and the role we all play in maintaining a strong democracy. And we do need to take it very, very seriously. As I mentioned earlier, we want to share a special opportunity for all of you to participate in your very own Common Ground conversation. The Unify Challenge does just that. How does it work? After you register, we'll ask you a few questions about your background and opinions. On the event date, you'll join online and we'll match you in a conversation with someone who may vote differently from you. The two of you will work through a series of questions on a super easy to use platform, learning more about each other's beliefs and perspectives. Just click the link in the chat and sign up for this one-of-a-kind civic dialogue on June 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Our ability to illuminate Common Ground is possible because of committed donors, supporters, and followers. I'm delighted to recognize just a few who believe that finding common ground is crucial to society. Our deep thanks to Ed Glassmeyer, Linda Bunce, Kay Williams, Amanda Whiteman, and the McCullum Family Charitable Fund. Please join them and become involved with our mission. On behalf of Common Ground Committee and 92NY, I want to thank you all for attending this evening. If you'd like to find out more about Common Ground Committee, please go to commongroundcommittee.org. And to find out more about 92NY, the Newmark Civic Life Series, and the Belfer Center, go to 92ny.org. And finally, a big thanks to tonight's terrific moderator, Jackie Adams, and our very distinguished panelists, Donna Brazile and Michael Steele. And please sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss any of our upcoming events this year. Thanks again, and good night, everybody.